Hey there, Squirrel Army! How's it going? For today, I want to discuss why I've stopped playing Dual Lands.
You can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing.
Why have I stopped playing Dual Lands? Here's why. So most of my decks, all but one of my decks, which is my 4-color deck, are 2-color decks. So having not that many dual lands in those decks doesn't really hurt those decks that much. And like I was talking about this before in which dual lands are kind of worth it and which are the best dual lands I think recently or whatnot. Those sorts of videos that I did fairly recently-ish. There aren't that many super amazing dual lands, sort of in a lot of senses. Like they can be good in certain decks. Like I say, I've got that 4-color deck, and that kind of needs dual lands and whatnot. But it actually, realistically, it needs like rainbow lands more than it needs like dual lands. So it's one of those things, you kind of want multiple colors of lands in that deck. But all my other decks are 2 colors, and as I said in a lot of those videos, like either one color, like green or white or whatever, is the dominant color, and the other color is just kind of there for a few other cards that are kind of helping along with what you're kind of doing, or for removal, or for other things like that. So it's not really that you're playing blue-green or whatever you're playing blue with some, green, or you're playing green with some blue, or whatever it is. So that's what I mean. Like, you can just, I just weight my deck to have most of that one color that is most dominant in my deck. And yeah, if it's like almost 50-50, then that's fine, because you can just go, well, most of my early turn stuff is green stuff, so I want more green-ish on the early turn so that I can get the engines started and get the ball rolling, because otherwise it's sort of tough to get that ball rolling otherwise. So saying, well, I'm going to run maybe one more green source or whatever, or maybe 2, I don't know, depends. But you don't want to overload yourself on that, because especially if you are kind of a 50-50 deck, you want to be getting your other color as much as you can, and dual lands do help you with that. But honestly, they just get wrecked by Blood Moon and things like that and whatnot. So and I always say you should not run cards because there's answers for them, or there's removal, or there's things that make them worse or whatever. But that is a small reason to say, oh well, they're not that amazing. But they also don't provide any utility, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I've decided to sort of cut a lot of dual lands from my deck. Yes, not literally none. Like I say, I do run fetch lands, but I usually only run the on-color ones. So, in my Selesnya decks, I only run Windswept Heath, so that's pretty much it. Except for my Simic and my Chatterfang deck, because both of those decks are basically mono green because that's how they kind of worked out, just being mono green basically for the most part. So it's a bit different there, because the idea of what the deck's doing relies so much on the green spells. There are a few blue spells, but not nearly as many, so it's almost a mono green deck splashing into blue or splashing into whatever other color. So yeah, you honestly don't need that many, that much fixing, because you're not, most of the time you're gonna get it anyway. Plus, again, my Simic deck makes mana of any color a lot of the time, or the commander helps make mana of any color. So, you've got fixing right there on your commander's effect, so you don't really need to worry about it. So yeah, this is one of those things. It does depend on what your deck's kind of doing and whatnot, but for the most part, I like the Horizon lands, actually, one of the most out of the land cycles that they've kind of printed in the last few years, because they have extra utility. Yeah, sure, I've got to pay life for them when I've got them or whatever, but that's, a small amount of the time, and I don't love losing life. That's why I sort of cut down on shocks and so many fetches in my decks, because it was like, well, I always have to shuffle and fetch and shuffle and fetch and lose life and all this other stuff. And it's just like, well, that's actually, like, despite it being, like, logistically, like, a small problem, perhaps, like, it's not that big of a deal, I guess, but still, it is one of those things. It takes time to do those game actions, and I'd rather just be, like, playing the actual game and getting along with the game, which is why I play a lot of, like, the lands that tap for mana, as well as being able to search for other lands and whatnot, like the Panorama cycle, and they've actually printed a few of these other sort of cycles, like Shire Terrace and Warped Landscape and things like that, that sort of tap for mana as well. So those lands I tend to run because they have that extra utility. They tap for mana, which is just, that's fine. Like, they tap for colorless mana, who cares, whatever, or generic mana or whatever. So who cares? Like, you're just, like, gonna use it on your spells when you need it, and then, like, if you really need to fix your colors, like, you can sack those to go get your land that you need. But otherwise, you can just use it as a mana source and just, like, play the game. Like, and if somebody's silly enough or whatever to go ahead and try to wasteland your land or whatever, that's just, like, tapping for mana and could go fetch a land or whatever, like, you just crack it in response and just be like, okay, cool, I'm just gonna go get a land, see ya, bye. Like, get no value from your wasteland, thank you, bye. You know, like, that's one of those things about those lands, like, they are very useful. And again, like, same thing with the Horizon lands. Like, if somebody goes to blow it up, well, okay, well, I'll just, you know, crack it for a card, you know, I don't care. Like, like, at this point, you know, it's been doing me stuff, so, you know, that's probably alright. And at this point, like, I'll probably draw lands, maybe, I don't know. But still, it's just one of those things. I'm always kind of looking for extra utility in my lands. So, again, even so, I'm, like, running a lot of, like, Mirror's Truth and cards like that and such, because I'm like, those are pretty good effects. And then, like, the thing is, like, with lands, we always say this, the opportunity cost for playing lands is, like, net zero. So anything that you can kind of add to your lands that makes them do more than just tap for mana, especially when you've got so much other stuff kind of going on. Sometimes you're just like, cool, I've got all this mana, not really much to do with it, so I'd rather be actually getting, like, something out of my lands rather than just them tapping for mana. And, like, Aurum Reef, the Vast Woods, like, a really good one as well. There's a few that they've printed in the last few years that are pretty good. Like the Castle cycle, and a couple of the other ones. So yeah, like, I'm always looking for those sorts of effects, because, like, especially, like, on lands that have a color as well, like, they don't have to come in untapped. Like I said, Aurum Reef comes in tapped, and that one's pretty good. I used to not love Myriad Landscape that much, and Krosan Verge that much, though I did run them here and there at some points. But yeah, I used to not love those as much because they came into play tapped, but now I'm just being like, well, that doesn't really matter. Like, you're just, like, playing it because it's a land that, you know, taps for mana effectively, and, like, if you get it early on, it's fine. If you get it later on, you're just gonna hopefully be able to crack it as quickly as possible. Yeah, and yeah, it's one of those cards that green doesn't 1000% need, but it's just fine. You don't really care about it. Like, you just be like, okay, cool, if I need to crack it at some point and get 2 lands, sure, I will. But, you know, like, most of the time you're just fine and happy having it sit there until you, like, miss a land drop, or until you just, like, hit 3 lands in a row, or whatever else it is. Or you can just be, like, going strategically, and if you know what the top card of your library is, or the top 2 cards, or whatever else, and if you know it's a land, or if you know that sort of thing, then you're just like, okay, cool, I'm just especially if you've got, like, landfall or lands matter triggers or whatever, or lands matter effects, like, you're just going to go, okay, cool, well, I'm just going to get these lands that are in my deck out of my deck, and get my extra effects and then, move on with the rest of my day because, hey, I don't want to draw those lands. Yes, I want to have them for doing other things, but I don't want to, actually draw them right now. I would rather draw, real gas. And that's the good thing about those lands as well, is because they're not as threatening as like real fetch lands, like, I guess, as well. Like, people don't really see the problem in them as much as like the not OG, but OG fetch lands essentially. So they don't really see that because you have to pay mana and not life, so that's a small hurdle. But yeah, like, again, they tap for mana, so they usually pay for themselves for the most part, and that sort of thing. So it is a big thing that, you've got to kind of weigh this up for yourself. Like, I wouldn't say that everyone needs to do what I'm doing or whatever. It's not the best of advice, perhaps, for some people. But as I said, in like saying like which dual lands are good or which dual lands are worth running and that sort of thing, like, not many of them are actually like that honestly amazing when you get down to it, because again, it's like, well, what does it do besides tap for 2 colors of mana? And that's what I mean by command tower. Like, in my 4-color deck, again, that's really good in that deck. But in my 2-color decks, it's just like, oh, okay, well, I've got, potentially several of those cards. Like, I've got Windswept Heath or whatever else, or, Windswept Heath is the fetch, but whatever, you know what I mean. Like, I've got, the OG duels, like, again, and I'm not going to play those. I'm never going to get those, probably. So, and I don't really know, because it's just one of those things about getting shocks again, because it's like, well, I had them, and then I didn't, and then I, did, and then I didn't, and then it's just like another big investment to make in the game, and it's just like, well, don't really need to, and like, again, that's the point, I guess, is like, I don't need to, and you don't need to either, but you don't need to listen to what I say. It's always, you can take what I say with a pinch of salt, but still, like, just thinking about, like, why are you running them, like, or what's the point in them? Like, if you've got a 4-color deck, 5-color deck, then sure, maybe, but it does depend. Like, again, I'd rather be running rainbow lands for the most part, or lands that tap for more than 2 colors for the most part. But unfortunately, most of the lands, like the cycle, the old 3-color cycle that they printed, and the Triumph cycle that they printed, are all enter the battlefield tapped. And like I said, that's not the worst thing in the world ever. But like, if they didn't have cycling, and they just entered untapped, then I'd be like 100% in on them. Because I think cycling like is an alright mechanic, but I'd rather it be able to be sacrificed to draw a card or whatever, because like that, or whatever, do something else because it's more relevant later on. In that regard, because like you want to use it for mana for the most part in the early to mid parts of the game, and then later on you want to discard them. That's why I think a lot of people run the cycling duels. They could be alright as well, but again, I'm not a huge fan, because again, like, I'd rather be playing them in the early parts of the game, and I'm like never gonna fetch for them, so you've got to luck into them. For the most part, and they do enter tap, so there's that small downside again. So you're always looking at, that doesn't kill it, but you've always going to be going, well, is this downside that it has? And you got to be legitimate and just be like, for real, like, you're not going, well, this kills it. No, it doesn't. Like, you're just going, let's think about this. Let's figure this out. Let's, debate this, and figure out, is this actually something that's worth it for me and whatnot. And again, like I say, when I play against some people and they see me playing Panorama or whatever, people don't look at that like they're looking at Windswept Heath or whatever else, like those sorts of fetch lands and things like that, because again, they're a lot slower, but they do tap for mana on their own. So it's like, well, that's a nice trade-off for me, because again, like, people aren't really gonna like Ghost Quarter or whatever those away that much, because they're just like, well, doesn't matter. Like, it's not, it's not like Gaia's Cradle or whatever. Yeah, you can get a basic or whatever, but it enters tapped, so who cares or whatever. But I wouldn't do that unless, like, I haven't got the mana for a few turns, or I've just got mana for a few turns just to kind of shuffle my deck and get, hopefully, out of the lock of getting all the lands in the world, which happens sometimes. That, or not getting any lands at all, again, kind of things. And it's really good with the ones that actually get 2 lands, but, like, because you're not really going down on lands in that regard. Whereas you're sort of, like, net neutral when you're, sacrificing a land to get 1 land. So it's much better to sacrifice the lands when you're, like, starved of lands, or whatever you want to call it. That get extra lands and whatnot, or get extra effects, like get you treasures or whatever, that sort of thing, because, yeah, it's much more worth it to get that extra mana at that point, so that you can, hopefully get your next spell off, which you've probably been holding on to for a few turns. But yeah, those are my reasons for not running basically a lot of dual lands anymore. So yeah, you guys can let me know what you think. Do you think I'm silly or whatever for not running dual lands? You can let me know. Write your thoughts down there in the comments below. Hope you've enjoyed one way or the other, and hope you will join me again in the next one.